Well, if it isn't the consequences of my own actions. Well, I mean, actually, I, I don't mean that in a literal sense. I mean that in the 9060 XT has launched. Today, they hit retail availability, and today we're going to take a look at the 9060 XT. It seems like an earnest effort by AMD to really capture the market, and these GPUs could not be launching into a better competitive environment. The 9060 XT, it's no secret. My review of the 9060 XT launch was yesterday. We got coverage of 3 different configurations of the 9060 XT. Spoiler alert, they all perform pretty similarly as one would expect. They have slightly different feature sets and bonuses. You know, the connector variability, there's 3 connectors on here. This is a cost down card. Hopefully is available close to MSRP, $349. This is the OC version of the Steel Legend. I'm also pretty pleased with its performance in both Linux and Windows. We're going to take a look at it in Windows in the configuration. But if you want to check out 9060 XT performance in Linux, check out the Linux video that I did on that. But let's talk about it. Let's talk about the Steel Legend. So ASRock is launching a Tai Chi version that we saw at Computex. Remember all of the cool stuff at Computex? There's even a white version of the Tai Chi that has a little LCD screen, but that's a testing card. They're not sure. They're just sort of looking at it and working on it. This is the 9060 XT OC edition, and its board power goes up to about, AMD let their board partners really mess with this. So it's like 160 watts to 180 watts. This one comes in at about 185. So this doesn't use the most board power. That goes to the Sapphire. The Sapphire uses more power than any of the 9060 XT cards I've tested so far, but it also doesn't use the least power. The Asus uses the least power. And so this card stacks up about where you'd expect, mostly in the middle of the pack, but we're talking about, run-to-run variances mostly. This card's also overclockable. It's got a flow-through design like most of the other designs. It's got an overkill heatsink, in my opinion. It's a 2.5 slot card. The Challenger edition of this from ASRock is a 2-slot card. We saw that one at Computex as well. Check that out. I know a lot of you are interested in true 2-slot cards because of builds like this, but I always like to show the small form factor builds, and it's like, yeah, the Steel Legend fits just fine in here. It has a separate ARGB header that's on the side here, which is nice. And it has a single 8-pin power, and it has a ARGB on-off switch. Truthfully, I would have liked to have had a dual BIOS and a dual BIOS switch so that you could pick between A and B. That makes the Linux use case just a little bit better. But, being able to toggle the blinding RGB on and off is nice. Very nice. I don't know. I just really like that the competitive environment that AMD is launching into, and the MSRP is pretty good. I don't know if you're going to be able to find these cards at MSRP. It does change the calculus a little bit. If these cards are significantly more expensive, you're going to have to do a little bit of homework and math on your own. I can't just say, oh yeah, this you should totally do it. I am very pleased with the Linux experience overall for this platform, and I'm very pleased with the level of fit and finish and polish for the Adrenalin drivers. How crazy is it to say that in the 5000 series launch, and also Intel Arc, that AMD has the best and most stable GPU drivers? Have I stepped into the mirror universe? Is Spock with a goatee going to come through the door? No, it's just hard work and perseverance and AMD trying to be a relentless execution machine. So there's that. Anyway, that's enough rambling. Let's get on with looking at how the card actually performs. Be Steel, my beating heart. Will this card be legendary? It's the card, the myth, the legend. Okay, let's start with Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 1080p. Shadow of the Tomb Raider 1080p with a high preset. The 9060 XT is holding its own here against the much more expensive 5060 Ti and the 4070 Founders Edition. Now, you shouldn't be buying the 4070 Founders Edition in 2025. Well, in the used market, if you can find a good deal on it, yeah. But right now, at the time that I'm doing this on eBay, they're like $500. And so, you got to do the calculus there. That also keeps the MSRP thing in check. So, if gamers are smart wallets, they're educating themselves, they're going to look at this and they're going to say, oh, I'm definitely not going to pay over $500 for this card, or even like $449 would be like super pushing it. with tariffs and everything else. Maybe things dry up on the used market. Maybe that drives prices up on the used market. By the time that I'm doing this video, a 4070 Founders Edition is like $500. And keep in mind that it also only has 12 gigs of VRAM instead of 16. Now, there is also a Steel Legend 9060 XT that only has 8 gigs of VRAM. Look out for that. You probably don't want that one because it should only be about $50 more expensive. Tariffs and like final MSRP, all of that accounted for, because the cost of another 8 gigs of GDDR6 VRAM. But yeah, so like just pay the $50 now because the card will last longer. It will not be obsolete sooner. Shadow Tomb Raider 1440p, it's doing pretty well, 145 FPS, 122 for our 1% lows. This also is important because Shadow of the Tomb Raider is like, it's a fixture. It's like a bog standard. And so you look at this and you look, do we have linear scaling from 1080p to 1440p? And a lot of these newer generation cards, we don't have linear scaling. Now, how non-linear the scaling is varies from game to game. But what I mean by that is that the performance in 1440p can be really similar to 1080p. Now, Shadow of the Tomb Raider 1080p is quite a bit better than 1440p, but that's not necessarily true in all games, and it's not necessarily true depending on what the geometry of the card is. We saw this with like the 5090. The 5090 performance at 1080 is basically identical to 1440 because there are other bottlenecks elsewhere. And even on cards at the lower end of the stack, like the 9060 XT, that can also be true. There can be bottlenecks in other places in the stack that prevent the performance from coming up as much as it should when you scale down from 1440p to 1080p. This also has implications for resolution scaling, like FSR or XeSS, because some games will let you run XeSS on AMD hardware, and sometimes that's a better experience. It varies from game to game. Sometimes it's just a matter of the graphics and render engine being able to push that number of pixels. Ray tracing is another variable on top of that, as we'll see. So let's take a look at Assassin's Creed. Now, if you've watched my other 9060 XT videos, I've pointed this out in them as well. The 5060 Ti Prime, like 4X frame gen, is not always the savior. I really enjoy 4X frame gen on like the 5090. On the 5090 on an OLED display, this is an absurdly ridiculous like $1,000 display. Very fast pixel refresh time, very fast pixel response time. You can run at like 480 hertz at 1080p, which is just absurd. I like to run it at 240 hertz 4K mostly, except for like testing and everything else. But the OLED response time, like it is butter for your eyes. It's great. It's fantastic. The 5060 Ti here is not a good gaming experience, in my opinion, with 4X frame gen. The 5060 Ti just can't do it in Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed is a standout because other games are less bad, but Assassin's Creed is the worst. Now, 1X frame gen on the 5060 Ti is fantastic. 1X frame gen and frame scaling and being able to dial this in, I was able to get pretty good performance out of the 9060 XT Steel Legend. I was very satisfied with the performance. It looks like it's on top of the pack here, but you have to keep in mind this is a preset and FSR quality, and this might not be a true apples to apples comparison, but with 1X frame gen, I was very satisfied with the Steel Legend 9060 XT performance. With frame gen off, the cards line up about how I would expect. The 9060 XT is really holding its own even against the 4070 Founders Edition and is pulling ahead of the 5060 Ti Prime. Now, there's a little bit of a variable here with 5060 Ti Prime too, which is that there was a Windows update from May 28th that wrecked my 5060 Ti performance in trying to fix some of the black screen NVIDIA bugs, I think, or like that plus the NVIDIA driver update. And so like I tried to roll back one driver version and roll forward. And so this is on a little bit of a suspect testing platform, but this platform also completely broke Indiana Jones and the Great Circle testing on the 5060 Ti. And I got it working, but I don't trust the numbers 100%. And so these numbers are sus, but we're just going to move on. Let's talk about Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk 2077, Phantom Liberty, 1080p, high preset, no ray tracing, FSR quality. Multi-frame gen here was less bad. Like generally, I enjoy multi-frame gen on Cyberpunk in general on a 5090. On the 5060 Ti, if I were playing Cyberpunk, I probably wouldn't run 4X frame gen. It's better in Cyberpunk. It's unusable. I don't like the experience in Assassin's Creed. That is subjective. In Cyberpunk, it's debatable whether I would leave it on or not. I might not. I like 1X frame gen in Cyberpunk. It's okay. And it's pretty good across all of our GPUs. And our GPUs basically stack up here. There's not, at real world, there's not a huge performance difference for all 4 of our cards here at Cyberpunk 2077. The 9060 XT, even with frame generation off, is doing really well here with 153 FPS, 124 for our 1% lows. The 4070 and the 5060 Ti do pull ahead a little bit here, but overall, the actual gameplay experience, in my opinion, pretty good. It's also nice to see that the ray tracing features of this are basically intact, at least with Cyberpunk. We're going to take another look at another game here in a second, where the ray tracing features is like, oh, maybe they cut a little too deep on the 9060 XT in terms of ray tracing. But in Cyberpunk, I was pleasantly surprised that I was still able to play with medium ray tracing and have a good experience at 1080p. What about 1440p? So at 1440p with a high preset, no ray tracing, and with frame gen off, the cards line up about how I would expect, and it is a perfectly reasonable, playable, good experience with frame gen off completely. 1x frame gen was a good experience on all 4 of these cards, and I definitely would not play with 4x frame gen on the 5060 Ti. Not an enjoyable experience after experiencing it. Like, I'd rather play with 1x frame gen even though my average frame rate is lower in this particular game. Just throwing that out there. Now 1440 with the medium preset with ray tracing, same story. It's pretty playable on all 4 of these cards. We start to dip a little below 60 FPS with the Arc and the Steel Legend, which is a little disappointing. Cyberpunk here at 1440 with no frame gen or upscaling or any of the kind of technologies like that is still pretty playable across all 4 of these cards, about 68 FPS. And notice the B580, the little plucky B580 is holding its own here. It's been bringing up the rear for pretty much all these benchmarks, but it does okay here. This is true across several games. This is just a sampling of the games that I played. The B580 is a shockingly good card. 12 gigs of VRAM. Like, Intel really put a lot of thought into sort of carefully sizing that GPU. And it shows because some games, it's holding its own. The 9060 XT falling a little behind the 5060 Ti here, but the 5060 Ti, again, remember that those are a more expensive class of card. And with frame gen, it's like, oh, the 9060 XT, we're doing over 100 FPS with 71 as our 1% lows. Not too bad, because you get a little bit of frame scaling. All this. The Cyberpunk presets are weird. Subjectively, my opinion, this is a good gameplay experience for all 4 of these cards with reasonable medium settings, even with ray tracing. Let's talk about Monster Hunter Wilds at 1080p. It's a good experience across all 4 of these cards. The 9060 XT pulling out kind of an unexpected win here. Again, in the gaming stack, there's a spectrum, and like Assassin's Creed's all the way at this end, and Monster Hunter Wilds starts to get into the other, sort of more pro AMD side. And there's even more crazy pro AMD games like Doom Eternal, where it's just like plus 40%, and it's like, that's weird. That's really weird. Like, it's like plus 40%, and that's conservative, over the 5060 Ti and Doom? With the 9060 XT's pulling out a win? Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Monster Hunter Wilds, this is a raster result. 104 FPS, this is very, very playable. Really, it's playable across all 3 of the cards. The B580 struggles a little bit, but the 5060 Ti and the 9060 XT Steel Legend, functionally, there's not a lot of difference here. If you pay significantly more for another GPU and the performance is similar, it's like, oh, whoops. I also note the 1% lows are a little worse. Now, with ray tracing, you lose a little bit, and it sort of narrows the gap, but we're still at almost 100 FPS, which again, on a monitor like this, it's great, because 4K, when you scale 4K to 1080p, you get 4 pixels per pixel, so it still looks really sharp. If you want to step it up to 1440p, a raster result here, we're still like 80, 86. This is a great example of that non-linear scaling, and also notice our 1% lows, basically identical. With ray tracing, 77 and 72 FPS. 77 FPS average. Again, it's that non-linear scaling. You would be have a more enjoyable experience playing at 1440p, I think, because you get much better visual fidelity over 1080p, but not a significant performance fall off. Now, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is another standout because it basically requires ray tracing. And if you have a 6 or 7000 series GPU from AMD, it's a different gaming experience because of the ray tracing aspects. More or less, sort of, kind of. There's also path tracing. And so this was not done with path tracing. enabled for the benchmarks here, so you can go even more crazy. But 100 FPS average at 1080p on the high preset is really, really good. So even with raster, you're still getting some you're getting some ray tracing, but it's just not, you know, the crazy ray tracing. And so if we step it up to 1440p with the high preset, 72 FPS and 66 FPS for the Steel Legend. Remember, at 5060 Ti, it was a little sus. You know, in the 4070, like the NVIDIA drivers, Windows update, I don't know. Something did not go according to plan, and I didn't have enough time to go back and retest. But Indiana Jones with ray tracing in the forest looks fantastic on the 9060 XT, and it's eminently playable. There's also features in Indiana Jones specifically where it's like try to keep the frame rate above 60 FPS, and so it'll do dynamic resolution scaling and that kind of thing. And that is a reasonable feature. Like with that on, playing through the game in situations where it seems like it would hitch or stutter, because it's not a super well optimized game. It was an enjoyable experience at 1080p. At 1440p, I did notice that it struggled sometimes and made me want to sort of dial back the settings to like the medium preset instead of the high preset, which is a little worse in terms of visual fidelity, but it's still eminently playable at 1440p. Now I mentioned Doom Eternal. Doom Eternal, like just playing it on Linux, Windows, there's pretty good performance parity between that and like Monster Hunter Wilds on Linux versus Windows. Kind of shockingly, check out the Linux review of the 9060 XT if you're interested in that. Doom Eternal is like plus 40%. I don't think that's driver related because that was happening before the 28th driver update, but it got worse after the driver, like the gap widened. And so that'll probably be fixed. That's probably just some sort of weird hiccup. But like the Doom, the Dark Ages on these cards is just insane for whatever reason. Yay AMD. And that's true of the 9070 as well. The 9070 XT got, you know, significant performance up because Doom, the Dark Ages launched after the 9070 XT. So those cards are also faster. But the 9060 XT, if you want to play it, you can probably play at 4K, but at 1440p, 100-ish FPS. I always like testing in the Super Gore-Nest area because there's all kinds of explosions and your frame rate will go up and down, up and down, up and down. And there are times at 1440p where the frame rate will dip down to like 60-ish or 65-ish, but FreeSync, absurd monitor, and the ridiculous amount of action going on the display. I was surprised to see that because I didn't feel it, but you know, the id engine here is also sort of nuts. So take that with a grain of salt. Let's talk about the artificial benchmarks, like Monster Hunter Wilds, the high preset. Artificial benchmarks, go. All right, 3D Mark Firestrike. Well, the card lines up about where I'd expect. If you watch my other reviews, this is basically identical performance between all these 9060 XTs. For Geekbench, OpenCL, and Vulkan, I was kind of surprised to see that the 9060 XT wasn't doing better, especially in OpenCL. I mean, this is a technology that I feel like that something can be updated here, because the 5060 Ti and the 4070 Founders Edition are doing significantly better in both OpenCL and Vulkan for whatever reason. 3D Mark Port Royal. These four cards line up about how you would expect based on raw compute and everything else. It may have to do with memory bandwidth on OpenCL and Vulkan. Like that may end up being more of a memory bandwidth test. AMD has got Infinity Cache on this. I mean, we talk about the boost clocks and game clock on the Steel Legend. You know, I was seeing 3320, which is among the best boost clock scores for this game, and you know, the game clock score, let's see, 2780 for about the best result that I saw in the game clock configuration. So you can overclock these cards, you can turn them up. I mean, you can have board power go well beyond 200 watts. And I did have good luck overclocking all three of the cards that I had. The Steel Legend did particularly well with overclocking and a board power of like 220 watts, give or take. It can overtake the 5060 Ti in just about every scenario. Of course, you can overclock the 5060 Ti, and that opens up a whole ball of wax that I don't want to open up in this video. But be aware that overclocking is a thing with this generation. You're not going to overclock to double your memory bandwidth. It's still 128-bit GDDR6, and so that's why I think some of these suffer a little bit maybe. Procyon AI text generation score. If we look at, you know, the 9060 XT is sort of bringing up the rear, but these aren't terrible scores if you look at the tokens per second benchmark. And so like the tokens per second, it's like, oh, this translates to not quite as terrible a tokens per second in terms of bringing up the rear, the difference between, you know, 90 and 115 tokens per second, or 63 and 81 tokens per second when you're using the AI doesn't feel as big, but still, it would be nice to have more of an improvement here. If you're interested in the AI stuff, check out Amuse. Amuse has AMD optimizations in it, and it performs well, and it's a lot of fun to play with, so you're not completely left out, but just be aware of that. And this is also 3D Mark's artificial benchmarks, and so again, real world, I don't know. 3D Mark Time Spy, the cards stack up here about how I would expect. The 9060 XT Steel Legend is doing particularly well. It's PCIe Gen 5, it's 16 lanes. Even in our plucky little 13900 HX mobile CPU and our little Minis Forum motherboard, it's doing pretty good here. We're gonna get like 82, 83 FPS at our 1440p high retest on Monster Hunter Wilds. Now on the 9900 X3D system, it was like 80, 84, 85 FPS or whatever. So it's a little worse, but that's not dramatically worse, and it's still a pretty good gameplay experience. And so people that have older machines that are looking to upgrade, like if you're on a 2000 series NVIDIA GPU, or if you're on certainly anything older than a 6000 series GPU from AMD, you might want to, like 60, I'm thinking like 1060, like a 900 series, like 9070, whatever, like 1060, 1070 is a pretty good upgrade if you don't want to spend a lot of money. If you can get the 9070 XT at MSRP, also a good deal. But yeah, I don't know. That's it. That's basically it for this review. This has been a quick look at the Steel Legend 9060 XT from ASRock. If you need a dual slot version, be sure to check out that Challenger card because it's dual slot. And it's, again, the performance grouping is so close on the 9060 XTs that I've tested. It's going to come down to what can you find at retail and how does it perform at retail? And it's like, can you get it close to MSRP? Is it not wildly off the MSRP prices? I hope not. Good luck and happy hunting. I'm Wendell, this is Level 1. I'm signing out. You can find me in the Level 1 forums.